Hi, people. Thank you for stopping by Building Wealth with Rajeev. Everybody's looking for next Tesla or next Netflix or next Facebook or next Amazon. Now, where will it come from? Will it necessarily come from US? Maybe not. Maybe yes. It might come from Africa. And precisely in Africa, I had a chat with Bill Mann. Bill Mann is heading small cap research for Motley in US. He spends a lot of time finding African jewels, and he talks about them in our chat. Hope you like the chat. If you like the chat, please share it with your friends. Do comment on it. Do follow the channel. So in Africa, like what's exciting for you in Africa?
I think one of the things that so Africa is really hard because most of the markets you just don't really have you don't really have access to as an individual investor. So one of the best ways to play, there are some South African companies that are available outside of South Africa. Some people have access to the Egyptian market, but one of the best ways to play Africa, I think, is to look at some of the larger, fast-moving consumer brands that have big stakes there. There are also some fintech companies, and some of them are not necessarily ones that you would think of. I mean, if you can get access to the Kenyan market, I think one of the most exciting companies in the world is the Kenyan telecom company Safaricom.
Oh, really?
Safaricom is, it is basically what you would describe as the old national telecom company of Kenya. But they also have a payment program called M-Pesa, which is throughout the country. You'll see these green stands everywhere, the remotest part of Kenya, and it helps people who don't have formal banking relationships. They don't have a bank account that gives them the ability to conduct commerce without cash. So Safaricom, very hard to buy, but you can get at it by owning Vodafone, which owns most of Safaricom, and Vodafone is buyable.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And Vodafone is listed in the US, right?
Vodafone's listed in the US. Yeah. So there are a lot of companies. There are a lot of companies like that. There are some direct players in Africa. A company that I remain fascinated by, and I've actually recommended it in one of our services, but it's an eyes wide open recommendation. Is a company called Jumia. And Jumia is
e-commerce.
Yes, yeah. So their e-commerce, their e-commerce segment is and probably will continue to be a disaster because the logistics in Africa are such that, so for example, I work with a hospital in Kenya, and our address, this is for a hospital, is Gynecare Hospital near Eldoret Road. So how the heck is a delivery person going to find you? Right? They aren't. The address system just doesn't really allow for that quick delivery that you have to, but so I think that the e-commerce component for Jumia is going to remain difficult, but that other part of the coin, the logistics and the fintech component of the company, could and should be huge for that same exact reason, where they're in a market where doing simple things is hard, and they have a lot of experience. They're gaining it as they go, and they're figuring out what it is that they need, where it is that the opportunities lay. And I think if they crack that code, then they can go back and be like a JD.com in China, where they've got their own logistics network together, and they're not so dependent upon the publicly available facilities to move goods throughout the continent. So that's a really interesting company to me. It should do well. I really have no idea.
Okay. So that's why it's called eyes wide open.
Eyes wide open, right? Like it's one of those companies that if you were to tell me 5 years from now that it doesn't exist anymore, I'm like, yeah, that ties. It's a $2 billion market cap company now. If you were to tell me that it was a $50 billion company 5-10 years from now, it also ties.
Do you take into account some kind of hurdle rates, while recommending these companies?
I do. It very fancily when I was managing an emerging market funds, we called that Omega. So there's Alpha, there's Delta. We called it Omega, and that was basically the country risk.
Okay.
Right? I'm waiting for Harvard Business School to call me up, and we're going to talk about Omega, but they haven't yet. But so we build that into we build that into our discount rate, and we do a number of things. The first of which is we think a lot about the difficulty within the country we think about we consult corruption indices. We look at who are the competent regulators. I mean, the nice thing about owning Vodafone, for example, is that you have all this access to Africa, but you have the Dutch and the English regulators that are overseeing the company.
Mm-hmm.
The same with Millicom, which owns cellular networks throughout Africa. It's very Africa dominant, but it's based in Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, if you close your eyes and you had to choose one, would you accept the general accounting practices of Nigeria or Luxembourg? Like, I know where I'm going. So it gives you a little. It doesn't give you an unadulterated access into Africa, but at the same time, it does lower that risk, that one risk factor, that Omega factor.
But that, including Omega, the delta you can create can well compensate for that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's simply a function of country risk.
Yeah. One thing
that we don't do, particularly in Africa, is we don't really account for currencies. We don't hedge currencies because most of the economy is actually, in a very sneaky way, based either on euros or dollars.
So if I'm an investor and I want to invest in Africa, the factors which besides obviously buying your subscribing to your service, what do I keep in mind? The regulation risk.
So regulatory risk is a big thing. We've even seen. I mean, obviously there was. We had a very tragic. Some tragic events in South Africa a little more than a month ago. So these are not. You're not talking about an economy or a market or a set of countries, that have that have a deep commitment to any one system of governance.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to bear that in mind. The thing that I've avoided in Africa is that most access that you get for in African companies, they're mostly banking companies or they are natural resource companies. And I don't see any real point in buying African companies that are in those two segments. But there are nascent areas of technology. Fintech, we talked about logistics earlier. In South Africa, there are a number of pretty cool manufacturing companies. So they exist. It's a hard market because maybe with the possible exception of South Africa, it's really, really hard for individuals to get access into Africa. But I would encourage people to keep looking and, and pay attention to companies that are trying to solve hard problems in Africa, because once they start to solve them, the barrier to entry to compete with them are going to be amazingly high.
Why are you so passionate, Bill, about Africa? We have Russia, we have India. I mean, India is obviously a different level, a little bit more, but Africa, like we have Ozone, right? The e-commerce company there, Ozone or what? I mean, so is it like you see more potential there, or is it?
I see and have done so. I see the potential for companies to develop because these countries are growing so fast. And I'm not, and I want to make clear, Rajeev, I'm not talking about 70% of someone's portfolio being invested in Africa. Like this is a place where I would describe this part of your portfolio as really truly the no more tears part of your, of your portfolio. But there's just, you're talking about markets where basic needs have not been, are not being met as of yet. And so the United States is growing and is growing annually at a 2-3% rate in GDP. The average African country is growing at 9%. So if you have a company that's simply growing at the rate of GDP, that could conceivably cover any of that country risk, any of that omega risk, right? They just have to bump along as the country is doing. In the US, if you had a company that's growing at the rate of GDP, maybe Singapore is the same boat.
Yeah.
You're talking about a company that has bond-like characteristics. That's not true in Africa. It's also not true in India. India is incredibly hard to invest in for non-Indian nationals and non-NRIs.
And there are capital gains taxes.
I really wish that it was. I wish that it was an easier to market to invest in. I did a long time ago recommend, is 2006, an Indian bank called HDFC Bank.
Yeah, it's listed. It's listed in US.
Best run bank in the world.
You think so?
I do. For a decade, it was the best run bank in the world.
Yeah, no, it's the amount of returns they've generated is amazing.
It's outrageous. It's phenomenal. And Sabir Bank in Russia is kind of the same way. You can tell you have an incredibly well-run bank in a bad market because their cost of funds are so much lower than any of their competitors. That basically means that for for someone to go and set up a savings account, they want the money to be safe.
Yeah.
And HDFC Bank's reputation far exceeded every other banking competitor that they had. So people and companies were willing to accept a lower interest rate to make sure that their money was safe. It's a well-run. It's a well-run bank.
No, it's an amazing bank. Last question. Any other company you want to belt out in Africa? You've talked about 2. Any third you have, and we close it?
There's a small cap company based in South Africa called Leatt, Leat is the ticker here in the US. And they make it's a pretty neat it's a tiny company. They make they make personal protective equipment. Like motor sporting equipment, helmets, restraint systems, things of this nature, and it's an export-based business. It's based just outside of Cape Town in South Africa. I think that's it's a fascinating, very very small, quickly growing company.
What's the key business? Is it?
Their key business is automotive and motorsport safety equipment. In fact, if you go into a biking store, you'll see the Leatt helmets, you'll see restraint systems, things of that nature.
All right. I think that's cool. I think Bill, you gave me 20 more minutes than
I did.
I love chatting with you, and I learned so much, Bill. I think you're a fountain. You have so much of knowledge to contribute. So really appreciate your time.